Hello. So, on today's module, we are going to talk about searching and citing academic articles in essays. This module is going to briefly cover what you need to know about searching for articles and when you are actually writing it. The reason that we are going to, focus a bit on this is because um, this course assessment is almost entirely of essay writing, and so I want to kind of give you guys the basics of doing that, kind of set you on the path to writing well. This is not to say that everything that I'll talk about in this class will be brand new information to you. It's not likely. There are many things I would say here that you may have already heard, but just taking what you've heard before along with things that you're hearing for the first time, and all mix it up in the bowl of knowledge, and it's all going to be useful to you. So there are three learning objectives. The first, we're going to identify the basis of searching for academic literature, identifying the databases we could use for those, and kind of put you through some of the things you should know about drafting a short essay that will meet the expectations of an academic writing. So, why search for academic papers? Which always brings the question is, can you wing it? And if you cannot wing it, why can't you wing it? And I always say that when you are writing academically, be mindful that you are not in a social media discourse. Social media discourse do not have, people just basically write how they feel, on that day or whatever, what their personal style is, but academic writing is structured, right? Unlike social media, academic writing is structured. There are things that anybody who is reading it expects to see, and therefore expects anybody who is writing academically to know. So that is why we need to understand that there is a structure to how things are written, and we want people to kind of keep that in mind when they are writing academically. And this then goes to the fact that whatever you say needs to be backed by science. You are getting a science degree. You are making conversations about science. This is about public health, this is about population health, this is about science. Therefore, what you say should be backed by science. That just goes to show that it gives credibility and weight to the things that you say, because we now know that you really know what it is that you're talking about. And, more or less like saying, it's not enough to just say, trust me, I know. We want to know that you know by knowing where it is that you got your knowledge from. Because in knowing where it is you got your knowledge from, then we can assess if, what you have to say is something that is worth saying or something that is worth knowing. You understand? Because anybody can say anything, but the question is, of all the people, of all the anybodies that can say anything, who should we listen to in terms of that? So that is why we need to know what people's sources of information is, because if your source of information is questionable, so is your knowledge, meaning that anything you say based off on your knowledge, which is questionable, makes it makes it not credible, right? Whatever you're writing becomes not credible because the source of your information is not credible. So that's just how that goes. So, and always bear in mind that science has existed for centuries and it keeps getting updated with research. This is to say that it is very unlikely that you are the first person with the knowledge that you are sharing. You're not the first person. Things have been, the likelihood that things has been written on this subject is very, very high. And we want to know what has been written, because new knowledge is built off on old knowledge. And we want to know what the old knowledge is and kind of see the evolution from the old knowledge to the new knowledge that you now have to, share with us. So that's how that goes. So, yes. So you need to, share your source. The question is, why do you need to use academic journals for it? Academic journals are evidence-based for the most part, because that is the foundation for which they are. There is a rigor to which journals are done in terms of the papers that get into journals. There is an assumption there's been rigor. There's rigor in first the science that you use to carry on the research to now produce the paper, and there's then rigor that comes into having other scientists read the paper, review the paper, and then judge it as being good enough before it can then go into public consumption. You understand? So that rigor means that you don't just wake up in the morning and just say anything that you want and that goes. There's been stages, there's been a couple of gatekeeping that happens before it finally comes out to be that product that people know. That is the premise on which we tend to kind of go on academic journals, because we believe that it means that rigor has controlled for bad science. And people, bad science meaning it could either be unintentional, meaning the person who did it didn't know they were practicing bad science, and also it could also mean that it would be people who are intentionally doing bad science and trying to get away from it. So what rigor does is that it does help in controlling for it. That doesn't mean that it completely eliminates bad science, but for the most part, there is there's a good amount of control that happens, with that, which kind of makes it more acceptable, more credible for the whatever is said in academic journals. So, and then rigor is standardized, right? So there are things that have been systematically determined that this is acceptable, and other things that have been systematically decided that this is unacceptable. So, which means that whether you are reading a paper in the UK, whether you're reading in the US, or you're reading it in Japan, or you're reading in different countries, there is a standard in which people said, okay, this is how things is done. This is how things is done, which means that the review or the assessment of the papers, of the assessment of the research, becomes a lot more objective than subjective. This is not to say that there's absolutely no subjective, assessment that goes into it. But for the most part, because of the standardization of what we use to review the papers, that does bring in some rigor to it, which kind of makes it better that somebody who doesn't know you can read your paper and look at it from an objective point of view than somebody who, that sort of thing. So that's how that works out. So it is not a perfect system. And one of the things that I always tell people is that it's not a perfect system because of how much goes into the writing, and the science can bring some cost elements to it, meaning that it's not all topics or all subjects that get through all those gatekeeping, meaning that some subjects or some topics kind of don't get a lot more light shone on them than others. But it also means that things that happen anecdotally get to not get taken seriously because it's not backed by science, or it's not backed by evidence. So we understand it's not a perfect system, but for now is a system that we have, and right now is the next best thing that we have. We do hope that in time, some work keeps being done on that system, whereby we kind of make more room to accept things. So, and you would hear me say this again and again, when you write anecdotally in terms of what your experience is, I am not going to count that as science. So when that happens, please do not feel bad about it. I'm not saying that what you have to say is not credible, or it's nonsense or anything like that. I'm just saying it based off on the system, right? The system that says we want science to have been gone through, rigor of review of the sort of things, without which we kind of don't place as much weight or what to it. So that is the reason. So, like I said again, it's not a perfect system, but it's what we have now. So, you just to say. So now the question is, does it have to be an academic journal? Do you always have to cite an academic journal? The answer is yes, but the answer is also no. So the reason why I say that is because, when information comes from government agencies, they are accepted as well as the information that come from academic journals. You may say, oh, but they don't go through that entire rigor thing that I talked about. Yes, they don't. But the thing is that many people in government agencies are there. A lot of the times, those who get to be spokesmen are kind of being there as subject experts, right? And much of the thing that they are doing there is based off on information. We don't expect to see a let's say a I'm trying to think, the Secretary General of the UN to pass along misinformation or disinformation. You understand? Because we understand that based off on his position and his reputation, he wouldn't want to have to say wrong facts or say incorrect things just because of this. This is not to say that there's never been a case whereby government employees kind of go along with propaganda and stuff like that. That does happen, but for the most part, you will have the science community pushing back and saying this is not backed by science, and would always, for the most part, always say no, this is not true because this is not backed by science. So that happens. So in a way, they are acceptable, but also it's one of those things that you really need to shine kind of search through and really do a lot of assessment on it to decide, okay, could there be other things that may be influencing this information from this agency that may therefore make this information not to be as credible as it used to be? So that's that. And then, of course, you have professional associations. They do also have, put out information that are acceptable, but also like government agencies, they could also be influenced by, agendas and stuff like that. But for the most part, information that come from academic journals, that come from government agencies, that come from professional associations are considered acceptable when it comes to it being evidence or being science. So there's something to pay attention to. So where do you find academic papers? The reason why I have a preference for academic papers as against government agencies or association is for practical reasons, really. One of which is being that they have a much broader and wider range of information. Like you can find some information, you can find some government websites or some government informations or publications in these academic databases, but you will not find as much of all of those in the government websites and stuff like that. So in terms of practicalities of getting information, academic databases are a lot quicker and to find information. And they also come with pre-prepared citations, so you don't need to create one for by yourself. Most of them, you have where they give you a suggested citation, which makes life so much easier for you. So you could just go with that rather than having to create one by yourself. And then some of the databases that I'm kind of have a preference for is PubMed, Ovid, and Google Scholar. But there are a couple of others. You could search through if that's something of interest to you. But from my experience, for the most part, this has been able to do the job for me that I have needed, unless I'm doing a much intensive type of search. Which then I have to go a lot wider. But for the most part, these three works. But university libraries also have, able to have these databases for journals. So the SLU has the SIMS library, and a couple of things you could do with the SIMS library. You could use the Ask a Librarian option. function, or you could also schedule a consultation so that they can kind of put you through how to use that. So it's something to kind of give a look at. I have included in the assigned viewing videos of how I use PubMed if, in case you're unfamiliar with it, and how I use a Google Scholar also in case you're unfamiliar with it. Those I have those how to that could help you if it's something that you're unfamiliar with. So the third objective is, now you have to draft your essay. First things first, you need to, make some decisions. And one of the decisions you need to make is, what is your subject of interest? What is your topic of interest? And if it's a debate, I always tend to decide on the position first before I start searching, but you don't have to do that. So some people do prefer having to research both positions and then deciding on the which side they want to go with. I tend to be the lazier student that takes a position and then goes to get for information that I need for that. But you just go with whatever feels right for you. And then usually, you should skim through the databases, so that you can kind of gather as much papers as you can that you need, and then select a few appropriate papers, not too much, so you don't get overwhelmed. Now, what is too much is, very much subject to person to person. What I may consider too much may not be what you consider too much. So, just basically go, with whatever is comfortable with you. But try as much as possible to go as wide as you can. Some people, if you're used to just doing 3 papers, kind of stretch the muscle a little bit and go maybe towards 5 or 6, just to help you just step by step get, broadening your sphere of search. So, and then after you found the appropriate papers, then you skim through the papers. Skimming through the papers gives you an idea of what it is, the content of the paper. Skimming through, generally read the introduction and read the discussion. That's generally how I go about it. I read the introduction and I read the discussion. Then I decide, okay, which of, what do I need? If I need more information, then I read through the results. But for the most part, I do introduction, I skim through the introduction or the background, depending on the paper, and then I skim through the discussion of the papers. That's just generally how I go about that. And then after that, I outline my paper. I tend to outline my paper with the information from the paper, outline my essay with the information from the paper. So which means that before reading the papers, my essay is blank. There's nothing on it. What goes into my essay is the information that I get from the paper. Those information determine what I'm going to write. So that's how I go about it. And I don't know if there are people who do it the other way, but this is one way that I have done it, and it's something that I would advise other people to do. But of course, if you find another way that works for you, that's perfect. The most important thing is that you're able to write a good essay. That's what counts for most. So, what do you do when you're writing an outline? The most important thing is to remember that a well-structured paper must have the following. It has to have an introduction. It has to have a body. It has to have a conclusion, right? So what the introduction is just a general overview of the topic that you're talking about. The body is the meat of the essay. That is the main dish, right? So this is what should take the most of your attention and your time. So that is the meat of the essay. And then you have the conclusion. The conclusion is a summary of all the deductions that you made from what is in the body. So that's how that goes. So I'm going to use what the introduction does is, for example, what you're doing in the introduction is you're providing a general overview. For example, it says describe what a healthcare system is, just in case you were asked to okay, let's say the topic is this, compare the healthcare system in the US as against other systems in other countries. So what you would do in something like that is to focus on, describing what the healthcare system is, then summarizing, or you could summarize the healthcare system as well, talk about how it's funded and stuff like that. Then the body is the meat of the essay, like I said. So this is where in this topic where you're doing a comparative piece, this is where you do the comparison, right? This is where, and what comparison is, and I always, like to explain to students, what comparison isn't is, this is what orange is and this is what apple is. That's not comparison. What we've done is describing what in this example, what the writer has done is described what orange is and described what apple is. The writer has not compared them. So that is important, that one understands that they are not the same thing. Just because you're describing something doesn't mean you have compared them. It's something to really pay attention to. An example would be, in terms of comparison, would be orange is A and B and C, while apple is C and E and D. So right now you could see that there is some similarities between orange and apple, which is in C, and there are differences. A, apple doesn't have A, apple doesn't have C, orange doesn't have E, and orange doesn't have H. So this is comparison. It's something that's completely different from the description part of it that I talked about. Another way of looking at comparison would be orange has A, B, and C, but apple only has B. You have to compare. It's very important when you're comparing. Remember, describing is not comparing. So what happens is that when you're asked to compare something, you have to first of all describe it. We need to know what it is that you want to compare. And after you have now described what orange is, and then we can now understand how orange differs from apple, right? You've described orange, you've described apple. Now you now tell us this is how orange differs from apple, and this is what apple has in common with orange, something like that. So oftentimes when you are asked to compare, what happens is that many people use the description part of that work, they make it to be the body of, make it part of the introduction, right? And this happens especially in longer essays where you're expected to, put a lot more attention in the comparison. Your description goes into the introduction, right? You can talk about what orange is and what apple is in your introduction. And then the body of the essay is where you then go right in and do the comparison. So, and this applies, whether your task is to create, your task is to evaluate, your task is to analyze. You have to begin by describing first before you then go into, creating, evaluating, analyzing. So always remember, if you're needing to compare, describe first and then compare. If you're needing to create, describe first and then create. Describe first, evaluate. Describe first, analyze. So that's how that goes. So this way, you've kind of taken the reader from, level 1 to level 2, carrying them along as you're progressing, in the knowledge that you're sharing. And I always tell students to please use subheadings and paragraphs. It's very important because they do help in improving the clarity of whatever it is that you're trying to say. When students use run-on paragraphs or run-on sentences, it's a torture to the person who has to read it. I mean, if your intention is to completely frustrate your reader, job well done. But if your intention is to get good grade, you want to pay attention to how you write. You want to pay attention to to your grammar, you want to pay attention to your punctuations, you want to pay attention to your use of paragraphs and your use of subheadings. These are very, very important when it comes to a well-written essay. So your conclusions should really be very brief summary of the information that you've already, put in your introduction and in the body. And for example, I use the say your topic is, compare healthcare systems in the U.S. with the rest of the world. You kind of summarize, what that is, or maybe you could say, oh, U.S. is better. And this is ways in which US is better, and this is ways in which US is worse. And then do 2 to 3 short paragraphs. That usually suffices in your conclusion. 2 to 3 short paragraphs generally does the job. Something I really wanted to mention is that it's very important for students to stick to the scope of the work. For example, if the instruction is compare healthcare systems in the US with the systems in other countries, if you then start talking about healthcare systems within the US, you have what you're writing is out of scope. The instruction was to compare across countries. You need to compare across countries. If you don't do that, you would have wasted your time and effort writing the wrong essay. And there's only so much a grader could do for you if you wrote the wrong essay. So you want to try to kind of stick to instructions. If you don't understand the instructions, I always say ask questions so that you know that you are in scope and what you're saying is you're really writing about what you're meant to be writing about. So always try to stick to scope, stay within scope so that you're using the best use of your time and effort. That's, what you prefer. So here is my cheat sheet for how I write essays. And so generally I decide what the topic is. And this is because when you're writing at a higher level, your instructions are a lot less precise. What I mean is, if you're in a bachelor's program, they may say, write about healthcare systems in the world, and they give you which parts of the healthcare system to pay attention to. On a master's level, you may be dealing with a much broader question, a more philosophical question that is much broader and allows you to go in as many directions as possible. For example, it could be, how does the healthcare system in America stack up to the healthcare system in the UK? Now, there's so many things you could say with a question like that, but you have to go with the direction that is of interest to you. What do you care about the most? For example, if I was going to talk about healthcare systems, I would be looking at healthcare system as it regards mental health, because that's something that I'm interested in. I could look at healthcare system as it has to do with diabetes, because that's something I'm interested in. So you want to kind of decide the direction I want to go based off on what it is that I care about. And then I generally prefer using PubMed for my searches. So I begin there. But if, that search yields little, then I, go on and try other ones. And I usually begin by selecting 5 or 6 papers. I look at the ones, that most aligns with my topic. I look for papers that are very similar to what it is that I want to write about. Let me just, for example, if I want to talk about mental health system in America compared to the UK, I will be looking for papers that are talking about mental health care system. I'm not going to pick papers that are talking about, let me use, for example, pediatric care, comparing the pediatric care in US versus the one in UK. Because my interest is mental health care system. That is what it is that I'm going to focus on. I'm looking for papers that are most aligned with my topic. So that's where I begin. And then what I do is I skim through the reference list of these papers because those 5 to 6 papers may not be enough for me to write my paper. So the reference list will be where else I need to go. Instead of having to begin my search all over again, I just need to go to the reference list and pick information from there, rather than beginning a search all afresh. And then I draft my paper. The way that I draft my paper is I copy chunks of information from the paper, and paste it into my essay. So I go through, I have all of those papers that I'm interested in, those 5 or 6, and then, the additional that comes from the reference list. And I just read through the parts of them that's aligning with the arguments that I want to make. I just copy it and paste it into my essay. I just copy. I just all I for the first 3 hours. What I basically do is copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. So when I do that, I then use my copy paste to structure my paper. I have my introduction, I have my body, I have my conclusion, all from the copy paste, copy paste. And then I go back and rewrite, redraft, paraphrase, do all of those things. But this system of having my introduction, outlined for me, my body outlined for me, my conclusion outlined for me, then means that as I'm copying those information, I'm also copying the citation that they are from, because I need to get the citations, because I'm going to have to cite them, and I don't want to copy and then end up not realizing where my information came from. So I'm copying the information as well as copying the citation. This doesn't mean that everything that I copied is going to end up in my paper. For the most part, sometimes I start a paper that is like 6 pages long. By the time I rewrite it, it shrinks down to 2 pages. But it came from the 6 pages, because everything that I copied doesn't make it into my final essay. And some things I would rewrite in such a way, maybe it was 6 sentences initially, but by the time I rewrote it and paraphrased it, it's down to 1 sentence. So, but basically, the copy and the paste, pasting, including information and the references, helps me in structuring my essay. So that I have something in which to write. So it usually makes it such that by the time I do all of that, the writing itself goes on a whole lot more quicker and easier than, doing it another way. But that is my cheat sheet. You guys don't have to do the same thing. But the most important thing is to find what works for you and try to, brush it up and improve it to the point whereby you can write quicker and write better. So I hope this is helpful to you. So this is where we end this class. This is a bit long, but hopefully this does, help you in your writing. And do have a lovely day. Bye.